Welcome to the first week of your online course. Today I'm going to discuss group counseling with you. Throughout this lecture, we will learn about many different aspects of groups. Right now I would like to talk about group types. There are 4 different types of groups: task groups, psychoeducational groups, counseling groups, therapy groups, what we also call T groups. Task group is as simple as it sounds. It's a group of individuals completing a task together. Examples of this include icebreakers, such as the things we did last week in class, or the things that we will do next week in class that you guys will actually get an opportunity to run. Psychoeducational groups are groups like a classroom setting, where we're providing information to a group of individuals. Counseling groups can either be preventative in nature, or they can be addressing a specific problem. For example, cutting, or something that is preventative, like looking at academic achievement or prepping for university life. Therapy groups, or T groups, tend to be a little bit more intense. We will not be providing these types of groups in either of the settings that we work in. So not in our schools and not in the university settings. However, it's important to know what a therapy group or T group is for. This might be a group where we're really targeting a topic of depression, or really how to deal with a psychiatric disorder. We're definitely not going to be doing that in our environment. So the 3 types of groups that you will most commonly use in your environment are task groups, psychoeducational groups, and counseling groups. So let's talk a little bit about how we make up our groups. So there's a couple things to consider here. We want to determine whether we're going to have an open group or a closed group when we are set out to run a group. So an open group, it sounds exactly like what it is. The group is open and allows members to join at any point in the group, whereas a closed group has a beginning time and an end time, and group members are selected in the beginning and they remain in the group for the entire process. They aren't allowed to add new members into a closed group, whereas the open group gives that opportunity. An open group also might run for an extended period of time with no end date. The size of group is going to depend. If you would like to look at a small group, the ideal size for a small group is between 4 and 6 group members. A large group is between 6 and 8 group members. As you can see, as part of our class, this class accepts up to 15 members, which means when we run our group, it's very large. Now, that doesn't mean you can't run a group at that size, 15, 20, although it does make it more difficult to get involved in each person's stories. Another thing to consider when we are looking at size of the group is if we are doing something in the K-12 school, we're doing a classroom guidance lesson, that's going to be with a group of about 35. At the university level, we may be going into a freshman seminar and doing a psychoeducational group. That also may be a group of almost 35 students. When we are looking at putting a group together, we want to think about gender. Now, this really does depend based on what age level you're working with. So when we're working with very little guys, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, mixing genders is just fine. As we get into the mid-grades, into high school, we want to keep those genders separated. And then as we get into college and adulthood, we want to go ahead and we can mix those genders back together, unless the group itself is a gender-specific group. For example, if I'm creating a self-esteem group for girls, then I want to make sure I'm only putting girls in that group. That makes sense. When I'm looking at the reason behind splitting the genders versus putting the genders together is, particularly in those middle grades, we are looking at individuals who aren't ready to be very open, and even less so in front of the opposite gender. So it's just something to take into mind as you make up your group. When we look at putting our group together, think about age. What are the ages that you are working with, and how far apart can group members be in regards to age? The general rule of thumb is to keep students about a year or 2 apart from each other, and that is the maximum you should put in a particular group. Now, that does change when you get to the university level, and it is okay to put all university students in the same group. However, when we are at the younger levels, you want to be very cautious of that. For example, if I'm running a group in a high school, I don't necessarily want to put a 9th grader with a senior in that same group. Or at the elementary level, I don't want to put a 2nd grader and a 6th grader together. So just be very cautious about that. Where is this not as much of an issue? If I'm running a group, for example, a grief group, I'm running specifically for loss of parents, and I want to make this group in my elementary school, it may be appropriate at that point to put a group together that has students that range all in ages in that group because of their common core, which is the topic itself. So how long should my group sessions last? Well, ideally, group sessions should last an hour and a half. Realistically, in the environment you're going to be working in, it will probably not last an hour and a half. Even in some private practices, I've seen groups only last an hour. In your particular environment, it is going to depend. For the university level, you'll be able to set an hour aside or a class period time based on your schedule framework. Whereas a K through 12 setting, you're going to have very different types of opportunities. Sometimes in particular schools and districts, you're only permitted to run groups during lunch. So those sessions may be limited to 30 minutes. Whereas in other schools or districts, you can run them during a class period, which sometimes is as low as 42 minutes. So you're running very short groups, so you have to really think effectively of how am I going to get these groups in, and how many sessions do I want? So that is really the next question. How many sessions do I want to do? What is the length of this group going to be? So you want to tend to put your group in one semester. So whether you're at the college level or at the K through 12 level, you want to make sure that your group is running not over a holiday break. What happens when we run over holiday break is people don't tend to come back to group, and you have more people transitioning out of group without you even realizing, even if you're running a closed group. Groups can run for as little as 6 weeks and go on for as many weeks as you'd like them to. When I go back to the topic of an open group, if I'm running an open group that starts at the beginning of the academic year and I'd like to run it through the end of the academic year, you are welcome to do so, and you will definitely notice an ebb and flow of your group members based on the time of year. The next thing that I'd like to target are some considerations for your group. So the times of day that we run our group. As I said in the previous slide, the times of day are going to be dependent upon your school or district or university schedules. So if I'm running a group at the university level and I want to run the group for commuters, it may be a poor choice to run that group late at night because my commuters may have gone home. So it might be a better idea to run it during a meeting time that's built into the schedule of the university, or I may find a time that works for the particular students that I'm looking for. In the K through 12 setting, those times of day vary. Sometimes I can run those groups, as I said earlier, during lunch, before school, after school. You have to think about what kind of attendance am I going to get during this group. I also may be able to run the group during the school day, however I'm only allowed to pull out students from their classes if they're in an elective class. That also makes things very difficult because every student has a very different schedule. Times of year we've already discussed. Trying to run within the semester makes the most sense because we do have such a transition during the holidays. Not to mention time off for things like snow, school closings, or coming in late. That really does attempt to vary the time of your group meetings. When we select a topic, we want to think about why we're selecting a particular topic for the group that we intend to run. So there has to be a need. Why am I wanting to run this particular group? Am I wanting to run this group because I'm interested in it, or because there seems to be a need in my environment that says we need to run a group like this? So let's say you've had a lot of students coming in to talk with you, and it seems like cutting is a big issue in your middle school. Well, I want to run a topic of cutting in middle school. Now, I don't want to call this group Cutting in Middle School because I'm probably not going to have too many people volunteering to get into this group. So I might think of it from the perspective of self-esteem. Okay, I want to run a girls' self-esteem group. I just decided to select a gender, a girls' self-esteem group about cutting, but I'm going to name it something very different. Perhaps increasing self-worth, or self-empowerment sounds like an even better idea. So in order to determine is there going to be a need, I'm going to start asking around fellow teachers, principals, other counselors, are there students that you feel would benefit from working in a group on this particular topic? Once you determine that there is a need, then you can move forward and create that group. So the first thing that you're going to need to do is pre-screen your group. Now this is a really important step in group, pre-screening, and one that we often forget. And the reason we forget this is because when you guys are out in practicum and internships, the counselor or the individual who's doing your supervision often says, here's a group, put these kids together, it's going to be fine, just go with it. And we're busy trying to make sure that you get all those videos that we don't really think about the pre-screening process. But I'm going to tell you a little story about why that's an important component to the group in just a second. So what is pre-screening? Pre-screening of group is talking to each individual member who you would like to join the group, telling them the purpose of the group goals, the objectives, and what you expect of them. Things like confidentiality, participation in group, attendance to group. Those are really important things. Also asking them if they feel like they would have any problems joining the group and how they feel about participating in a group setting rather than an individual setting. So my story about pre-screening or not pre-screening well was when I was in my first year as a school counselor. I was working in a high school doing some academic groups for kids. In my group, I was working with two particular boys who I had not realized through my lack of pre-screening were in actually opposing gangs. This did not go very well. And had I done my research and done my homework and done a little bit of pre-screening, I would have realized that these two individual boys were not appropriate to put in the same group together. Another factor to consider when I'm looking at group members and screening for my group is to make sure that none of my group members have a severe psychiatric disorder. Now, it is less common for us to see in the K through 12 setting, however still exists, more common at the university setting. It's just going to be really important for me to be able to identify whether or not that's going to be an issue in my group. So when do I want to run this group? Do I want to run it with a co-facilitator or do I want to run it as a single facilitator? This also is going to depend on your work setting and how many people are available to run a particular group. There's great factors that go with each of these different components. So as a single facilitator, I'm pretty much in charge of my group and how my group is going to run. I've got an idea of my goals and my objectives, and I'm just going to be the only individual running this group. The other option is to run with a co-facilitator. Now, a co-facilitator can also be a really great experience, not only for the students and those in your groups, but for you as a facilitator. Being able to play off another individual can sometimes be very empowering for you as the facilitator in order to provide more empowerment for those that you're serving. Another important thing to consider is who is your co-facilitator. This is actually important, just as important as pre-screening for a group. It's going to be important that your personalities are not exactly the same, that you bring something a little bit different to the group. And I say that because if we have the same personality, we're not providing the students in our group anything different than what they would get from just one of us. So you want to make sure that you would be able to play off one another and that, again, it would provide a good opportunity for those students within your groups. The next thing that I'd like to discuss is group rules. It is very important to create group rules for any group that you plan on running. Now, creating group rules is going to depend on the age level, again, of the students. They should be developmentally appropriate group rules. When you get into your middle school children, even your late elementary children, and into your high school students and your adults, I like to have the students help create those group rules. Whereas when I'm looking at early elementary school, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, I may create those group rules. It is important that you bring the group rules with you, remind members often of the group rules. Confidentiality in groups is very important, however, it's not guaranteed. There is no way for you as the facilitator to control what individual members of the groups choose to keep confidential and what they break in confidentiality. Now, it is still very important that you talk about things like what happens in group stays in group and really encourage members of the groups to keep the information they're hearing within the group. Talking about things of how might it feel if someone shared your story that you shared in group, and so on and so forth. Breaking of confidentiality in group does occur, however. Sometimes it occurs by the facilitators and sometimes it occurs by the members. Now, breaking confidentiality by the facilitators is going to happen for the same reasons that you as a facilitator would break that confidentiality in individual counseling sessions. So those would include if the student was hurting themselves, if the student intending on hurting someone else, or if someone was hurting the student. Those would be reasons that are acceptable for you as a facilitator to break confidentiality. Students sometimes can break confidentiality too, however. Sometimes things they hear, they tend to repeat somewhere else. And that tends to create a rift within your group itself. So how do we handle those things? Well, when there is a broken confidentiality by another group member, it's always going to be important that that is addressed within the group as opposed to individually. Why? Well, it's important that the group understands that you as the facilitator are handling that issue as a group facilitator as part of the group. What might that look like? So let's say Susie was talking about group outside of group, and now we're back in group and you can feel what's happening in the group. You sense that people are being a little cold to Susie, you're not sure what's going on. You might want to address some of the other students and have them bring the issue to light. Dan, I noticed that in group, Susie is getting the cold shoulder from a lot of the members, including yourself. Tell me a little bit about what you're feeling today. Another way to handle that might be someone from the group came to you and said, I heard Susie talking in my math class about the group itself, and I'm really concerned about that. And a lot of the members are concerned about it too. Okay, so when I get to group the next time, I might review confidentiality again and ask the group members to talk about any times where they feel their confidentiality is being broken. Again, trying to address the topic itself while the group is together. If I address the topic outside of the group, although as a facilitator I've done some work, the group itself does not realize that that work has been done and therefore may run into some distrust with the facilitator as well. During the next week, you will watch a video called The Evolution of Group by Corey and Corey. This group will be run and utilize 4 different stages of group. It's going to be important for you to understand these stages and know what they're about. Video does a great job of explaining that and providing you with examples. But Corey talks about his stages of group as the initial stage, the transition stage, the working stage, and the termination stage of group. In basic summary, the initial stage is where the group is starting. Everything is very surface in the group. Everyone's getting to know each other. The transition stage is where everybody moves into a place of a little bit deeper trust, but not quite ready to work, sharing some deeper things. Then we move into the working stage where the work really gets done. This is where people are putting out some information, getting information back, and really doing some processing on what they're there for. And the termination stage is that component of group where we're getting ready to terminate and everybody realizes the group is going to end, and we kind of create a closure for the group itself. Again, you'll see a very good example of this when you watch The Evolution of Group next week in class. It's also going to be important for you to understand the stages of group by Yalom. Now, Yalom is also a very big contributor to group research and group literature. His stages of group are considered the forming, norming, storming, and performing stages of group. Just like Corey, he has broken up the groups into different components. So the forming stage of group is as the group is getting together, getting to know each other. The norming is how do we make sure we understand our roles within the group. Storming process is where a lot of the work takes place. And performing is how are we going to take this group and use it for future aspects of our life. The next thing I'd like to talk about is the therapeutic factors of group. These therapeutic factors of group were created by Yalom, and a really important thing for you to understand how many different factors of group there are. So there are a lot of things that go into group counseling that we don't necessarily realize. All of these different factors are really important for creating an effective group that is going to provide a microcosm for the outside world so that members actually can take away something from the group experience. Overall, I want you to understand that group is one of those things that it's really important to understand what your goals and objectives are, but not become too rigid in the group process itself. For example, if I set a schedule to run 2 particular activities within a group, and once I get to that first activity, I have some good processing going, but I know I want to get to this other activity before the end of the group session, so I cut off the first activity to move to the second activity. That can create a problem, and you're actually truncating the activity or the process of the group itself. You want to allow group to process as it needs to, so group will be ever changing. I completely understand for those of you that have a personality where you like to schedule things. I am very similar in that fashion. I like everything to flow in an orderly, timely manner. However, with group, I have to throw it all away and I have to let it just happen because I have no idea if my group will process for 2 minutes or 32 minutes, and I need to allow them that time. I can pick up where I left off the next time that I have group, but I certainly, if I stop them, I may not allow the group to process in the way that it needs to process and move forward in the way that it needs to move forward. So I want to be really cautious about that particular thing. What I'd like you to do next is take some time to think about the questions you have about group. I know that listening to a lecture on group doesn't necessarily help you run a group, but right now you may have some preliminary questions about group. I want you to think about those, and I want you to go to the discussion board and put up your questions about group.